It was a cold, moonless night when my car finally sputtered to a halt on an empty stretch of road. I cursed under my breath and scanned the dark horizon. Nothing but trees and shadows stretched in every direction. My phone was nearly dead, and there was no signal anyway. The thought of spending the night stranded in the middle of nowhere sent a chill through me. That's when I saw the light. A faint, warm glow flickered in the distance. Squinting, I could just make out a small sign illuminated by an old-fashioned neon tube. Home-style diner. Relief washed over me. A diner in the middle of nowhere seemed odd, but I was too desperate to question it. I grabbed my coat, locked the car, and started walking. The diner was a throwback to a different era, like something straight out of the 80s. Its red and white striped awning, chrome accents, and cheerful yellow lighting felt oddly comforting. The smell of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee wafted through the air as I approached the door. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since morning. When I stepped inside, it was like stepping into a time capsule. Vinyl booths, checkerboard floors, and a jukebox softly playing an old tune greeted me. But what struck me most was the familiarity. It wasn't just that the diner looked retro. The wallpaper was identical to the one in my grandmother's kitchen. The clock above the counter was the same as the one my dad used to glance at when he came home late from work. Even the smell, not just of food, but something deeper, like the scent of my mother's old perfume, wrapped around me like a memory I couldn't quite place. "Evening, hun," said a waitress as she approached, her voice warm and inviting. She wore a uniform that seemed tailor-made for this place, a pale blue dress with a frilly white apron. "Just passing through?" she asked, handing me a menu. Her smile was kind, but her eyes lingered a second too long on mine. "Yeah," I replied, sitting down at a booth near the window. "Car broke down a little ways back." She nodded sympathetically. "Well, you're in luck. We're open all night. Coffee?" I nodded, flipping open the menu. And that's when my heart skipped a beat. The menu wasn't just styled after old diners. The breakfast specials included Mom's pancakes, and the dinner section had Grandpa's meatloaf, both recipes my family used to make. The kids' menu even featured Billy's mac and cheese. My name is Billy. I looked up sharply, but Debbie was already walking away to fetch my coffee. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Had someone hacked into my life and recreated this place just to mess with me? It seemed impossible, but the longer I looked around, the more unsettling it became. At the counter, a cook flipped pancakes while humming a tune that sounded eerily like my grandmother's favorite song. A man in a booth near the back wore a jacket identical to one I'd lost years ago. Even the salt and pepper shakers on my table matched the set we'd had in our house growing up. "Here you go, hun," Debbie said, setting down a steaming mug of coffee. "Ready to order?" I hesitated. "How do you know all this?" I asked, my voice low and shaky. "This menu, this place, it's my life. How do you know?" Debbie's smile didn't falter, but her eyes darkened. "Oh, we don't know anything you don't, sweetheart," she said cryptically. "What can I get you?" Despite my unease, my stomach won the argument. I ordered a grilled cheese and tomato soup, comfort food from my childhood. Debbie nodded and walked off, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Minutes passed, then an hour. The other customers didn't leave. They just sat there, silently eating or staring into their plates. The jukebox played the same song on a loop, and the fluorescent lights above flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows across the walls. When the food arrived, it smelled incredible, just as I remembered it. But the first bite sent a wave of nausea through me. The sandwich tasted wrong, bitter, metallic. The soup, too, was overly salty, almost briny, like seawater. I pushed the plate away and reached for the coffee, only to find it cold and bitter. "Everything okay?" Debbie asked, her voice laced with a sweetness that now felt forced. "No, it's not okay," I snapped. "What is this place? Why does everything here feel like me?" Her smile faded, and for the first time, her cheerful demeanor cracked. "This diner doesn't just serve food," she said softly. "It serves truths." Before I could respond, the room began to shift. The walls seemed to ripple like water, and the lights dimmed until I was sitting in near darkness. The other patrons turned their heads to look at me, their faces obscured by shadows. "What is this?" I shouted, standing up. My voice echoed unnaturally, as if the diner had expanded into a cavernous void. Debbie stepped closer, her eyes now cold and piercing. "You can't run from yourself forever, Billy. You left them. You abandoned them." The air grew thick, and I struggled to breathe. "I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, backing toward the door. But when I reached for the handle, it wasn't there. The door had vanished. Suddenly, the faces of the other patrons came into focus. They weren't strangers. They were people from my past, my mother, my father, my brother. Their eyes were hollow, accusing. Memories I had buried deep began to resurface. My mother crying when I left for college, knowing I'd never come back. My father's disappointed gaze when I refused to take over the family business. My brother's desperate phone call the night he needed me, and I didn't answer. "We trusted you," my brother's voice whispered, though his lips didn't move. The guilt hit me like a freight train. My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor, gasping for air. The diner seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing tighter and tighter until I thought I would be crushed. "Please," I begged. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Sorry doesn't change the past," Debbie said, her voice echoing from every corner of the room. "But maybe it's a start." The lights flickered again, and suddenly, I was back in my car. The diner was gone, as if it had never existed. My hands were trembling, and tears streamed down my face. I looked at my phone and saw a single missed call from an unknown number. Something told me I knew exactly who it was. I turned the key in the ignition, and to my surprise, the car roared to life. As I drove away, the weight of the past clung to me like a shadow. The diner was gone, but its message was clear. I couldn't keep running. It was time to go home. The rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the windshield as if the sky itself was angry. My girlfriend Emma sat in the passenger seat, her fingers drumming nervously against her thigh. The storm had rolled in faster than we expected, and the dark, twisting roads made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. "We should find somewhere to stop," Emma said, her voice tinged with worry. I nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. As if on cue, a neon glow pierced through the fog. A diner, its red and blue sign buzzing faintly, seemed to emerge from the mist. "Diner," it read in block letters. It looked like something out of the 1950s, chrome exterior, a long counter with stools visible through the glass door. The parking lot was eerily empty, but at this point, it was our only option. I pulled in and parked near the entrance. The rain didn't let up as we sprinted inside, our shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. The place was spotless, almost unnervingly so. The booths were lined with red leather, and the tables gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Behind the counter stood a man in a pristine white apron, his face frozen in a too-wide smile. "Welcome," he said, his voice cheerful but hollow. "Take a seat anywhere you like." Emma and I exchanged a glance but slid into a booth near the back. The air smelled faintly of grease and something else. Something sweet, like burnt sugar. The man handed us menus, and I noticed the clock above his head. Its hands were stuck at 3:17. "Storm like this, you'll want something warm," he said, his eyes never quite meeting ours. "Our coffee's fresh, and the pie's the best you'll ever taste." I nodded politely, though I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my spine. Emma ordered a grilled cheese, and I went with a burger and fries. The man disappeared into the kitchen, and we sat in silence, listening to the hum of the lights and the occasional crack of thunder. "This place is weird," Emma whispered, her eyes darting around. "Where are the windows?" She was right. There were no windows, just walls lined with vintage posters and a jukebox in the corner that looked as though it hadn't worked in decades. I shrugged, trying to dismiss the growing tension. When the food arrived, it smelled familiar. Too familiar. The grilled cheese looked exactly like the one Emma's mom used to make, right down to the golden crust. My burger had the same char marks I remembered from backyard cookouts as a kid. Emma took a bite and froze. "This tastes like home," she said, her voice barely audible. I nodded, the bite in my mouth suddenly feeling heavy. It wasn't just food, it was memories, somehow brought to life on a plate. We ate in uneasy silence, each bite dredging up feelings we couldn't quite place. When we finished, I flagged down the man to ask for the check. He simply smiled and said, "Oh, there's no charge. Enjoy your evening." As we stood to leave, the unease turned to full-blown dread. Outside, the fog was thicker than ever, the diner's neon sign barely visible. We climbed back into the car, eager to put this strange place behind us. But no matter which road we took, we always ended up back at the diner. The same neon sign, the same empty parking lot. Emma was panicking now, her breath coming in short gasps. "This isn't possible," she said, her voice shaking. "We've turned around 3 times." I didn't have an answer. The fog seemed to swallow the road, and every turn brought us back to the same chrome building. Eventually, we decided to go back inside. The man was still there, still smiling, as if he'd been expecting us. "Lost?" he asked, his tone almost mocking. I slammed my hands on the counter. "What the hell is going on here?" He tilted his head, his smile never wavering. "You can't leave," he said simply. "Not yet." Emma grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Let's go," she whispered, her voice trembling. We tried again, driving faster this time, but the result was the same. The diner was inescapable, an endless loop we couldn't break. Hours passed. Or was it days? The clock inside the diner still read 3:17, and my phone had no signal. Desperation set in. Emma started crying, and I felt a crushing weight of helplessness. Finally, we confronted the man again, demanding answers. "You're not alive," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "This is where people like you come when they're not ready to move on." My mind reeled. "What do you mean, not alive? We're sitting here talking to you." He shook his head. "You don't remember, do you? The crash, the storm. You never made it out." The memory hit me like a freight train. The blinding headlights, the sound of metal crunching, Emma's scream. I looked at her, and her wide-eyed expression told me she remembered too. "How do we get out of here?" I asked, my voice cracking. The man's smile faded. "That's not up to me," he said. "You have to figure that out for yourselves." The diner became our prison, each attempt to leave bringing us back to the same spot. We tried everything, walking, running, even screaming into the fog, but nothing worked. The food no longer tasted like home. It was empty, tasteless, a cruel reminder of what we'd lost. Days blurred together, and time lost all meaning. Emma and I stopped speaking, the weight of our situation driving a wedge between us. One night, as we sat in our booth, the man approached us with a somber expression. "Sometimes you have to let go," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Only then can you move on." The words lingered in my mind as I held Emma's hand. Tears streamed down her face, and I realized I was crying too. We had been clinging to each other, to the idea of escape, but maybe that was the problem. Maybe we weren't meant to escape. I looked into her eyes and said, "I think it's time to say goodbye." She nodded, her grip tightening before finally letting go. As we stood and walked toward the door one last time, the fog began to lift. The neon sign flickered, and the diner faded into the distance. A warm light enveloped us, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt peace. The diner was gone, but its memory lingers, a reminder of the thin line between life and death, and the courage it takes to let go of the past. I never believed in ghosts. Honestly, I still don't. Not completely. But if you ask me about that night, my hands will tremble and I'll look away. Because what happened at Benny's Diner wasn't just a story to scare people. It was real, too real. It started like any other Friday night. I was behind on rent and needed to make some extra cash. When my manager, Carla, asked if I could cover a double shift, I jumped at the chance. Benny's wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The diner was a relic from the 60s, with cracked red vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. It had charm, sure, but it also smelled faintly of grease and mildew. Still, it was mine. My turf, my place. The first shift was busy but uneventful. Regulars came in, ordered their burgers and shakes, and left generous or stingy tips depending on their mood. By 11 p.m., the place had emptied out. Carla handed me the keys and told me to lock up after the late-night crew came in. Then she left, leaving me alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of the soda machine. I was wiping down the counter when the front door creaked open. A man in a crisp white shirt and black slacks walked in. His outfit looked old-fashioned, like something out of an old movie. I opened my mouth to greet him, but he brushed past me without a word and disappeared into the kitchen. That's when I noticed the others. They seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Men and women in similar outdated uniforms, all moving with eerie synchronization. No one acknowledged me. They just started setting up as if they'd worked there forever. One woman, her hair pinned up in tight curls, grabbed a coffee pot and began pouring into mugs that hadn't been there a second ago. A tall man with hollow cheeks and a cigarette dangling from his lips worked the grill. He didn't light the cigarette, just chewed on it like a dog with a bone. "Hey," I called out, forcing my voice to sound casual. "Are you the late-night crew?" No one answered. Not a glance, not a nod. It was as if I didn't exist. Feeling unsettled, I stepped back to observe. The dining area began filling up. Customers streamed in, quiet, somber, and unnervingly pale. They sat in the booths, their faces shadowed despite the fluorescent lights. They didn't talk, didn't laugh. They just stared at their menus or the empty spaces in front of them. The food appeared like magic. Plates of pancakes, burgers, and pie slid out of the kitchen, passed through without anyone placing an order. The spectral waitstaff carried the dishes to the tables with mechanical precision. The customers ate in silence, their movements jerky and unnatural. My heart thudded in my chest. This wasn't normal. It wasn't right. I stepped into the kitchen, needing answers. The tall man was flipping pancakes, the cigarette still clenched between his teeth. The woman with the coffee pot was slicing an apple pie. I tried again. "Hey, can someone tell me what's going on here?" The tall man turned to me. His eyes were like empty sockets, dark, bottomless, and void of life. He grinned, revealing teeth stained yellow and jagged like broken glass. "You're late," he said. His voice was a gravelly whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "Get to work." Before I could respond, the clock above the grill caught my eye. The hands were spinning wildly, faster than I thought possible. Midnight came and went, but the clock didn't stop. It spun faster, the minutes and hours blurring together. Panicking, I backed out of the kitchen and stumbled into the dining area. The room had changed. The walls were charred black and the air reeked of smoke. The customers were gone, replaced by skeletal figures with sunken eyes and twisted grins. They sat at the booths, their bony fingers tapping on the tabletops in unison. The sound was rhythmic, like a countdown. I turned to leave, but the door wasn't there. In its place was a solid wall, scorched and crumbling. I spun around, searching for another exit, but the windows had vanished too. The diner was sealed, trapping me in a nightmare I couldn't escape. "You don't belong here," a voice rasped behind me. I whirled around. A woman in a singed waitress uniform stood there. Her face was half hidden by shadows, but I could see the burns marring her skin. Her eyes, God, her eyes, were filled with sorrow and something else. Resignation. "This place burned down in 1967, she said. "We've been here ever since. And now, so are you." My chest tightened as her words sank in. "No," I stammered. I'm not dead. This isn't real." She shook her head, her expression pitying. You stayed too long. Midnight is the threshold. Now you're one of us." I refused to believe it. Heart pounding, I ran back into the kitchen, desperate to find a way out. But the kitchen had changed too. Flames licked the walls and the air was thick with heat and smoke. The tall man stood at the grill, his grin wider than ever. "Clock in, kid," he said, tossing an apron at me. "You've got eternity to perfect your craft." I stumbled back, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a hallucination, a prank, something, anything but real. But then I felt it. The searing heat of the flames, the acrid smoke filling my lungs, the weight of the apron in my hands. It was real. Too real. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks. Time doesn't exist in this place. I serve the customers, silent and hollow-eyed, while the clock spins endlessly above the grill. The others don't talk much. When they do, it's in whispers, fragments of lives they left behind. I've tried to escape. Every night I search for a way out, but the diner won't let me go. The walls shift, the doors disappear, and the windows show nothing but darkness. I'm trapped, a prisoner of a place that died long ago. Sometimes new faces appear. People like me, desperate for extra cash or too curious for their own good. I want to warn them, to scream at them to leave before it's too late. But my voice doesn't carry, and they never listen. Midnight always comes, and the diner claims another soul. So if you ever find yourself at Benny's Diner late at night, don't stay past closing. Don't take the double shift. And whatever you do, don't let the clock hit midnight, because once it does, there's no going back. Trust me, I know.